Hi, John Herman here. This week, I'd like to finish up with our study of the book Final Gifts, written by hospice nurses Maggie Callanan and Patricia Kelly. I'll be reviewing and summarizing what these ladies have learned about dying people and their behavior. The hope is that if and when we become involved with a dying person, we will be better equipped to minister and comfort them as they get ready to proceed to the next chapter in their lives. The authors begin their review by reminding us that ministering to dying people is hard work, both physically and mentally. It's very easy to slip into a frantic frame of mind that leaves the caregiver emotionally depleted, physically exhausted, and utterly overwhelmed. For this reason, it's important to take care of your own health. Make sure you have people you can call upon for assistance. Take some time off periodically to step away from the dying person. Go to a concert or a movie, go out to dinner with your spouse or friends, whatever it takes to periodically distance yourself from your caregiving role. Remember, if your own health fails, you won't be much good to the dying person. Also, make sure that you have enough help to address some of the practical aspects of the dying person's day-to-day life and affairs. Dealing with these issues can become very time-consuming. For example, what about their health insurance coverage? What about wills, durable powers of attorney, paying of bills, transferring property titles, addressing business assets, and so on? If these issues can be addressed while the dying person is still cognizant and able to sign paperwork, life for the caregiver will be much easier. And also for the executor. It may seem to some that such matters would be callous and materialistic in nature at such a stressful time in the dying person's life. However, many times, the dying person actually welcomes the luxury of having someone else to handle these worldly issues. They have more important things to think about. Now, let's move on to review a few of the items that the authors believe will help you to recognize, understand, and respond to the needs of the dying patient. Number one, pay attention to everything the dying person says, even if it seems cryptic, vague, or garbled. That includes motions and gestures. The authors actually recommend keeping a notebook nearby to record these events. Then, if you can't figure out what the dying person is trying to communicate, talk it over with others. Not all events might mean anything, but it's worth considering. Remember the story of George, who was upset that he couldn't find his passport for a trip he was going to take. He was actually talking about dying and wanted more information of what dying was like. Once he got that information, his anxiety immediately decreased. Number two, watch for signs such as glassy-eyed appearance or an appearance of looking right past you or even through you. Also look for odd gestures such as pointing or reaching for something unseen, by you anyway. Ask the person what they are experiencing at that moment and try to get them to verbalize what they're seeing. Remember the story of Sue, who saw an aunt that had recently died, but who had not been told of her death. When finally informed of her aunt's passing, she understood why she had seen her. She was beckoning Sue to join her. That fact gave her great comfort. Number three, validate what a dying person tells you. If the person says that she sees a beautiful place, say something like, I'm glad what you are seeing makes you happy. Tell me more. Or if the person talks about seeing someone who you know is already dead, consider turning the statement into a question. Mother's waiting for you? I'm glad she's close to you. Tell me more. Whatever you do, don't argue, and don't tell the person that it's impossible to be seeing their mother because she died many years ago. That will increase the dying person's frustration and isolation and discourage any more communication with you. Number 4, remember that a dying person may speak using images from their life experiences. If a former airline pilot talks about going on a flight, carry the metaphor forward and ask if he knows when the flight will leave. Ask if there's anything you can do to prepare him for the takeoff. Number 5, if you don't know what to say, don't say anything. Simply holding the person's hand or smiling and stroking his or her forehead can give the person the message that you are with them. Don't try to offer advice or try to fix things. Also, it's better not to engage in idle chatter about sports, politics, weather, or the like. This line of conversation sometimes occurs if the visitor or caregiver feels uncomfortable in talking about death. This might lead the dying person feeling lonely or isolated because no one is willing to talk or listen to what is happening to them. Number 6, sometimes a dying person will choose an unlikely confidant to share information with, a person who may not be part of their family. This allows them to talk without being afraid of upsetting close family members or having them being taken aback by what they are saying. If this happens and it is appropriate, tactfully relay the information to family members. Number 7, if you hear messages with regards to what the person needs for a peaceful death, you are being asked to play a significant part in their final earthly experience. If appropriate, relay the message to someone who can help. For example, if the person desires to see a certain family member or friend to reconcile with them before dying, most people who become aware of that request will try to make that last meeting happen. Number 8, understand that if the dying person wants you in their presence when death comes, you will be there. If he or she doesn't, you probably won't. The message here is to live your life normally and not to feel guilty if you are not present in the person's final moment of life. They may be trying to spare you final grief. Remember the story of the boy who wanted a certain kind of pizza and then died when his mother left to get it. That's exactly what he was trying to do, was to spare his mother more grief. Another issue that should be addressed is the dying person's right to know their true medical condition and prognosis. Some people believe that if the dying person is spared the news, their death will be more peaceful. While possibly painful at first, being honest with the patient allows them to prepare for the end psychologically and spiritually, and allows them to get their personal business in order. Deception will not allow the dying person to die more peacefully. Also, remember that even if not told of their impending death, the dying person often knows instinctively that their time is short. Not discussing the situation brings about the unfortunate situation where each side knows but neither wants to admit it to the other. It's the elephant in the room phenomena. And number 10, I think the overall theme that the nurses wanted to get across to us is that we should listen and observe what the dying person is trying to tell us, and then act accordingly. Take on the role of being a detective and be aware and open-minded. Use reflective listening to get the patient to express their feelings. If they tell you something, respond with, "It sounds like you're trying to tell me such and so," which is your paraphrase of what they just said. This will encourage more dialogue on their part and also give validation to their feelings. Finally, remember that a good death is one where the patient lives until they are ready to die. A bad death is one where there are unresolved issues that never get satisfied. Now, in winding up our review, let's briefly look at something the nurses brought up in their discussion, and that is the observation of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that dying people often go through 5 identifiable stages. These stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. It's interesting that these stages are not limited to dying people, but can include family members and friends of the dying person, and really anyone going through a major life crisis or change. These stages may not happen consecutively, and the person may experience in one, then another, and then revert back to a previous one. Remember that these stages are only generalizations, and that not every dying person will experience all 5 of them. The reason that caregivers need to be aware of these stages is that it allows them to minister to the person where they are at the time. For example, if the person appears to be depressed, you should try to reflect those sad feelings. If they seem angry, empathize with them and try to get them to express the reason for feeling that way. Okay, let's look briefly at these 5 stages. The first one, denial. This is the attitude of, "I can't believe this is happening." It's a common feeling people get when they receive bad news. Sometimes the person will seek numerous medical opinions even after the reasonable and prudent second opinion. They may forget to take medications because they don't believe the diagnosis. Sometimes they will say that they are feeling better every day, even when it is obvious that they don't. When interacting with a person experiencing this stage, don't encourage statements of denial or agree with statements that aren't true. Also, avoid arguments. View these denial statements as wish statements. If the person tells you that he or she will soon be well enough again to go camping, don't respond with, "Well, you're really much too sick to be able to do that again." Rather, you could say something like, "I bet you'd really like that." By saying that, you have not agreed with their feeling or of denial, but are honest in acknowledging their feelings. All right, the second stage, anger. Who might a dying person be angry with? The doctors? The world in general? God for allowing this to happen? I thought about this. What if the dying person was a COVID patient and was angry with those who refused to follow the rules? When this book was written, COVID did not exist. In this case, the person actually might have a real reason to be angry. This is sort of akin to someone being injured by a drunk driver. Personally, I'm not sure how to respond to it, but other than to say just to listen. Good luck to you on that one. Moving on, though, if you encounter an angry person, remember that they often direct their anger to those who are closest to them. Don't take their anger personally. They are reacting to the situation, not to you. If you abandon them at this point, which might be easy to do, you will only reinforce their feeling of frustration and anger and the fact that no one seems to understand or care. By sticking by them, you will demonstrate that someone does care enough to stay and listen and to acknowledge their feelings. All right, the next stage, bargaining. During this stage, the person will try to make a deal with God. Many times, they will not verbalize it. It usually goes something like, God, if you just let me live until, and then they insert a time frame, I will, and then insert what that person will do. Sometimes there's no bargain, just a request to live until a certain event occurs, like a birth of a grandbaby or the close of a business deal. Rationally, this makes no sense. God doesn't need anything from us. He can do just fine on his own. On the other hand, he does listen to us, and there are examples in the Bible where people have requested longer lives and have received them. The significance of the bargaining stage is that the person realizes and admits that their death is a real possibility. In the first two stages, this isn't the case. It's also interesting to note that when people make bargains with God and then actually do recover, they seldom keep their end of the bargain. Okay, the fourth stage, depression. After the reality of death sinks in, the dying person may become sad and gloomy. They may think about the things they have not accomplished or the people that they will leave behind. They might think about losses they have already experienced or might in the future. Things like not being able to drive anymore, the loss of independence and control, and so forth. They see the familiar aspects of their daily lives trickling away. Depressed people often feel helpless and hopeless. They also may feel anxious and fearful, especially of the unknown. As a caregiver, you might observe that their movements are slower than usual, that they may not sleep well, and that they may lose their appetites. As their physical losses continue, their appearance may deteriorate and their self-esteem may also diminish. It's important to show the person in this stage that they are still wanted and loved. This can be done through actions and words. You might get the person's spouse to send a romantic card or special gift to show them that they are still worthwhile and wanted. At this phase, as this phase progresses, the person may gradually wean themselves off of concerns of this world until worldly affairs cease to have any interest at all. During this time, it's important to simply listen to the person and listen to the expressions of grief that they may have. It may be appropriate to hold their hand as well. Don't talk too much about your own lives in the outside world. And don't be surprised if they begin to cry. If that happens, assure them that it's all right to show emotions. At this point, prayer might be an appropriate tool to use. Remember, sometimes spontaneous prayers are more effective than ones read from a book. All right, the final stage, acceptance. In this final phase, the person shows a peaceful resignation to their impending death. The bitterness, fear, and depression subside, and their focus turns away from their own physical conditions and transfers towards family and other important relationships. Concern will be for the well-being of those left behind after they are gone. There still may be a glimmer of hope for a cure, but this is not of prime concern anymore. At this point, just listening is about all you should do. Let the person choose the topic of conversation. Don't try to steer them away from talking about items that may be morbid to you. You may find that a person who has accepted his or her fate will talk very matter-of-factly about their death, with no emotion at all. Again, their concern will be for those left behind. Towards the end, the person may not want to talk at all. In that case, it's okay just to sit there in silence. Your presence is enough. Holding their hand may again be appropriate. It has been said that many dying people complain that no one wants to touch them. At this point, I think I'm going to conclude. I hope that this study has equipped you to understand and then as a result to minister more effectively to someone who is dying. As the authors show us, a little education can go a long way in enabling us to help a dying person experience a more peaceful transition into might otherwise be a terrifying experience. I think that this is what God intended. Have a good week.